This is Dementia Empowered, the podcast helping family caregivers navigate dementia care, overcome legal and financial challenges, and make confident decisions to support their loved ones. I'm your host, Patrick Cawley. Let's get started. Empowered caregiving starts with anticipating challenges and planning for them. How do you do that when you are geographically far away? Keep listening, and you will hear that long-distance caregiving comes with some logistical challenges. Long-distance caregiving can bring some financial problems, and probably as a result of the first two, there are emotions that you are going to feel along the way. My guest today has been down the road that you are traveling. A financial advisor by profession, he's used to anticipating twists and turns that life brings us and having a plan for them. It's never only about the numbers. The numbers are a way to get you to what you have a vision of your life being. And Frank Rius, my guest today, has been down this road because he's been a dementia caregiver and he's done it from several states away. And if you're hearing this and you're thinking, how am I supposed to play a role when I'm not boots on the ground for my loved one with dementia? Frank's story will be very enlightening. Frank, thank you for joining me on the Dementia Empowered podcast.
Thank you, Patrick, for having me. Honored that you asked me. And hopefully my story can resonate with some people and allow them to understand how when I say we, my family and I got through this, and hopefully it will spark some thoughts and ideas that they'll be able to act on and know that there is a way to get through it.
Well, set the stage for me. Who needed dementia care? Who were the family members who were part of the care team?
So if I could back up a little, I was born and raised in Chicago, and I moved to South Florida in 1993. So I've been down here for quite a while. My mom and aunt were the two ladies that needed care, and they needed care simultaneously. So picture this. My aunt owned a building. It was a 3-flat apartment building. She lived on the second floor. And in 2017, my mom moved in on the first floor. And these two ladies would go everywhere together: church, breakfast, lunch, events that seniors would go to. They were always together.
Two peas in a pod. That's great.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And at one point, my mom fell and broke her hip. So that's where things, I think, typically start for people. That's really the downfall. Shortly after that, she recovered, and then she needed some back surgery. I'm like, gosh, God bless this woman. She is a force. And she recovered from that, but then fell and broke the same hip in the same place. And before she left physical therapy and recovery, the social worker told my brother, she can't live alone. You need to make some arrangements. And that's when stuff started becoming very complicated. So she was about a week away from getting released, and we scrambled and we finally found some help, but it was 24/7 help for both her, and shortly after it started for my mom, also for my aunt. So picture a first floor apartment, a pretty sizable living room, 2 hospital beds, 2 ladies in their 90s, each in a hospital bed with a caregiver all day long.
And this is in Chicago, and you're in Florida.
Yeah. In Chicago, I'm in Florida. Yeah. And not easy to
The
deal with.
family's there. If you're in Florida, who was there in Chicago?
So fortunately, my brother, who's 10 years older than me, is retired, had just retired maybe 2 or 3 years before this started. And he just instantaneously stepped into the role of, I guess I'll say, on-site caregiver, supervisor. And if it wasn't for him, my entire life would have been upside down. I would have had to have moved back. I would have had to transition my business. A lot would have changed for me. And I'm grateful. I don't say it often enough. So if he ever listens to this, John, I'm very grateful for what you did. If I didn't have him, then it would have all fallen to me. Because my aunt had no choice.
That's, I think, an important takeaway here right off the bat, because some listeners out there are you without your brother, John. They're right now in crisis trying to figure out, how do I move several states away to be there? Now, two ladies in their 90s in hospital beds at the same time, that's a lot because I think we're getting to cognitive decline, but obviously there's physical mobility problems when you're in your 90s and you've broken a hip a couple times and you're fragile. So that requires somebody on site pretty much 24/7, as you said.
Mhm.
So talk to me about the logistical challenges. What I see people running into is if it is somebody who has to get out of the house to go to doctor's appointments, making medical appointments can seem like you just got a part-time job, just lining up all the primary care, the specialists, coordinating somebody to be there 24/7. And if it's even just your brother, that's a lot. So how did these logistical issues start showing up?
It's the doctor visits, which really were very difficult to take place out of the apartment. So fortunately, we were able to find a doctor that would make house calls.
Wow,
I
that's
wish I could
great.
remember how that happened, but we found someone who was able and willing to do that. There was a nurse that came over. I think it was once a week, made sure the medication was in order, made sure that the vitals were being checked. And this is in addition to the caregiver that we had. And the caregiver became a live in because there's no way mom and Aunt Mary could have been left alone. So she actually ended up sleeping in one of the bedrooms in the apartment. It was a three-bedroom apartment, and she just moved in. And my brother would go to the apartment multiple times a week and made sure that the bills were paid, made sure that there were groceries, made sure that if the ladies needed anything specific, pharmacy, whatever, he took care of all that. It just, I guess it became a job because it was just a routine that he got into. And I don't mean to demean it by saying it was a job, but it just, we go on automatic pilot, I think is what happens. And we just get into this routine and we start doing these things daily, weekly, etc. And then he and I would message each other throughout the week, but we had a standing call every Wednesday because that was the one day for sure that he went to the apartment to check on things. And he and I would talk Wednesday evening. And even since they've passed, we still talk every Wednesday evening. It's now our night to chat, catch up. So without him, again, it would have been upside down for me.
It sure would have, and then not only just the 2 of you, so we're talking about a care team, because if you're from afar, there's only so much you can't get to the grocery store or wherever the groceries come from and get them to these 2 ladies. It wasn't just your brother who could do that, there was a live-in caregiver, there was home health, which if a nurse, if a physical therapist, any licensed professional is coming into the home, Medicare will likely pay for that. Now, it's not a lot of
Yep.
hours. You can always privately pay for more, but you're talking about a care team. And then you're talking about because there are these logistics of how is the health care being provided? How is just the daily caregiving, the getting through the day being provided? And it was not just your brother, it was not just you had a live in caregiver. But then coming out of this as well is we can talk about this maybe a bit later, but the fact that you had communication which is so important. But talk to me about because we haven't even really talked about this is a podcast focusing on dementia caregiving, but I think we can talk about the background of cognitive decline with your mom or your aunt. But I think people get the picture. These are people in serious need of support and care, and it's not going away as long as they're alive. So like you
Mhm.
said, go into autopilot financially, this is your business is financial planning. And can you imagine people who just can't swing everything that you just talked about? The caregiver 24/7 for two
Yeah,
people,
yeah,
all
yeah.
of managing the bills. Talk to me about that.
It's a shock to the system. First off, and the way I talk about dementia care, long-term care, Alzheimer's, whatever, it's emotionally draining. It's mentally draining. It can be physically draining. It doesn't have to be financially draining because if you plan for it, then you have the financial resources available. My aunt had a small policy that I had sold her many years before this happened. The unfortunate problem is that she got a 100% rate increase, and it just didn't make a lot of sense in her mind to keep it going. But we were able to maintain a small portion of benefit for her, which helped a little bit. It was a bit of a pain in the rear because it's a reimbursement policy and you have to submit the receipts and you wait for reimbursement. So that's like a 6-week turnaround, but that's only
And
part
you're
of it.
talking long-term care insurance because
Insurance,
that's
yes.
how most of those policies work. You pay a professional caregiver. If it's a 24/7 caregiver, you get the invoice, you submit it, and like you
Mhm.
said, weeks later you get the check to reimburse you.
Right. So you're putting out the money first and then you're getting paid later. There are policies now available where there are what we call indemnity. And I don't want to get into the logistics of all that because we're not here to talk about insurance, but it is available. It makes things a little bit easier. But the cost of the home health care and the aides for both ladies was about just shy of $14,000 a month.
It's a lot of money.
And they wanted to be paid by check. They didn't want credit card. And they wanted to be paid every 2 weeks because I guess that's how they paid the caregiver. And I remember one time when my brother called me, we were on the phone and he said, well, I just want to let you know that I've written the 100th check today, which, is just kind of earth shattering to believe. And there were resources available, but those resources slowly ended up disappearing. And I'm just talking about $14,000 a month for caregiving. I'm not talking about the upkeep of the building. The building was paid for, so there was no mortgage. Fortunately, we had that was behind us. But the electric, the heat, the maintenance, if anything needed to be done. And there were some little nicks and necks that needed to be repaired throughout. But we went over every single bill that needed to be paid, and we had no arguments about anything. That I think is a big help. We were trying to do what was best for the ladies to make sure that not only did they have proper care, but we made sure that, the resources that we had available would be able to take care of them. But arguing about money, fortunately for us, was not a thing. We
And
just,
that's not always the case. And
right.
let's before we get into that part of it, let's just recap some of the really important takeaways that you've already highlighted, which was there was some planning ahead with a long-term care policy. Now, you said it was a little policy, and I'm not going to get into the details with you, but you did say what the total cost of care, 14,000 a month, and your brother reports writing the 100th check. That's a lot of money, but there had been a little bit of planning going into it. And legally, you have Medicare, which will pay for the home health. The long-term care insurance plus personal resources will pay for the caregiving. Still, there's the maintenance of the building you were talking about. There's the groceries. And so then, you're handling a lot of logistics, you're handling a lot of the financial aspects of that. And then you've alluded to this, but the emotions, you and your brother, I mean, this must have been some sort of bonding at some level if you still have your standing Wednesday call, but you didn't fight because what good would that have done? But talk to me about how this brought you and your brother together.
Yeah, kind of, I guess, brought us closer than we already were. And in a lot of ways, we're very similar, and in a lot of ways, we're not. And I guess that's what makes our friendship, our relationship, as good as it is. But because we were communicating so much, because we had so much going on, it was a natural bonding for us. And when the caregiving first started, I was going up to Chicago maybe once a quarter, maybe a little bit. And there was that time period during COVID when I couldn't go at all. It was just impossible. And then as things kind of settled down a little bit, I was able to get up there more often. I want to just recap on I sent 100 checks. It was every 2 weeks, but the care for my aunt lasted about 2 years. Then it was just care for my mom for about 2 years. So I don't want to give the misconception that it's a 7-figure number that we had to
Oh,
shell out.
sure,
Yeah.
sure.
To make
But
sure.
14,000 a month and you're paying every 2 weeks and there's that
Yeah,
many
a
checks,
lot
I
of
think
money.
we'll get a sense of the math.
Yeah. And then as my mom started getting worse and worse, if that's the right word, I think it was 2022, I went to Chicago 9 times. It was almost once a month that I went, and, no thinking twice about it, just, I would leave, think of a date on the calendar for the next time, talk to my brother, okay, make sure, and, that became my clockwork as well, and think about my business and trying to manage that from a distance, and I was juggling a lot. He was juggling a lot, but all throughout the communication was always there. And people would think, "Oh, you're going to Chicago again. That must be really nice." Well, it's great that I'm going back home because I still call it home. But if I went for 4 days, 2 of them were spent with mom and Aunt Mary, or just mom, depending on the situation. Another day might be spent running around groceries, getting things. We also had to make sure that the final expenses were taken care of, the cemetery plot, the headstone, there's a lot of stuff that went into it. And then at one point we discovered and thought that, oh no, mom doesn't have a will. We need to get her legal documents in order before she's in a point where she can't sign them because she doesn't know what she's signing. And picture this, Patrick, we had to have an attorney who was going to draw up the documents, have a notary, a travel notary show up, and we had to have a doctor be there to say that my mom understood what she was saying so that the attorney's notary could then produce the documents so that my mom could sign them.
Yeah, this sounds very familiar. We've
It's
covered
just,
everything from the financial issue to even your anticipating end of life issues, but then it dawns on you that estate planning isn't there. And it's I go into this in other episodes, but it's far more than just a will. I mean, technically to act on behalf of the owner of a building, somebody ought to have a power of attorney. That's the most
yep,
important part in any family circumstance. But you're absolutely right. Emphasize to people that your estate planning as well as your financial planning is going to be the lifesaver for everybody,
yep,
but don't assume that if there's a dementia diagnosis or you're starting to see symptoms that it's too late to do estate planning. However, what you just described in such a vivid picture is exactly what we're up against. Then we have to make sure that this person can understand what they have, the people they have in mind to receive it one day, and they can connect the dots, which is asking a lot of a person the further they get down the
yep.
dementia journey.
Yep, we were a little bit on pins and needles, and because we wanted to make sure that everything could go through and that mom understood exactly what she was signing. My aunt had her documents already done. Thankfully, those were all taken care of before she got too far along. We had to make one or two adjustments, but she was of capacity to be able to do that. But my mom had nothing. She came from very little means and struggled a lot of her life living check to check. But my brother and I were talking, and I'm like, John, we need to get these documents, not only just her will and living will, her healthcare power, the executor, power of attorney. We need to get all this done and we need to step on it right away. So fortunately, because I'm in the business, I'm able to guide him through that. But imagine people who don't have a financial advisor to rely on, or people who don't have anybody to talk to, the mess that can be created at that point. And, I don't wish that upon anybody.
No, and I see it, and it's a crisis. And so I love that as you tell the story, this was just falling back on your training and what you see all the time. There's a financial aspect, there's a legal aspect, there's healthcare system issues, and you just saw the pieces of the puzzle. But I'm having you tell your story because there are people out there who this is not what they do for a living, and they don't just see those pieces of the puzzle that need to be filled in.
Yep.
So, you know, at the end of this, I'm glad that you came out the other side with a story of togetherness with your mom and your aunt and with your brother. And I don't think it's something anybody would choose as a journey in life. It would be great to not experience this, but it is true for so many people that this is what it looks like. And it's either a crisis or it's all mapped out as well as can be.
Yeah. I mean, there's planning is so important. And when I'm meeting with my prospects or clients, I tell my story when it comes to talking about long term care. And there's no good way for someone to leave this earth, right? Quickly. My dad died quickly at 67 of a massive heart attack. That wasn't good. The way that my mom and aunt passed away with dementia and old age and all, that's not good either. And I called that for both of them the long goodbye. We knew it was coming. We just really weren't sure when it was going to be. I guess fortunately, we were able to have clear heads and be able to think about and make sure that we had as much in place as we could as we got through that process. But it's not an easy process, and you have to have some sort of guidance. But honestly, the sooner that you can plan for it, the better. Because, like I say, my business partner, she says it too, because she went through it with her father and her stepfather. Long-term care has no age. Dementia has no age, and it can strike at any time. You have to be prepared with all the right things, and nobody wants to talk about it. That's the thing. And it's not that we're trying to jinx ourselves, because I get that a lot. Well, I don't want to jinx myself because then it's going to happen. No, it's not about that. It's really about making the decisions easier for your family because you've already made them, or at least they have the map to follow. If we didn't have the opportunity to have these plans in place, I don't know what would have happened. And also, it would have been extremely difficult to have access to any funds that either of these ladies had, because we may not have been on there as a joint owner or a
Power of
beneficiary
attorney.
or whatever, power of
Yeah.
attorney. Yeah. And that's the thing that I said to my brother, go, if something happens to mom, right now, we don't technically have access to some of her stuff. We need to make sure that we have access to that,
Yeah.
so that if and when it's needed, we can get to it without a lot of teeth pulling.
Well, and the key word, as you were just compiling your thoughts on what it was like to go through that, what it would be like to plan for it, you kept using the word we. So to the listeners, I say, focus on the we, because if it's just you, imagine how much more difficult Frank's journey would have been to care for mom and aunt. And it doesn't have to be just you. And even if there are no siblings, there's no family. Well, we can be you and your financial advisor. We
Right.
can be you and an elder law attorney. So there's always a we, and you just have to look for it. And on that note, if you don't have someone charting out the finances, what your finances are going to look like going into a long-term care journey, what the family members' finances are going to look like, I'd say Frank speaks from an awful lot of experience. You can reach out to Frank Rius at frank@palmwealthpartners.com. And Frank, I'm so grateful that you shared this emotional and financial and all kinds of other aspects of a conversation. It's a story that is powerful, and I'm sure you're still digesting it, but thank you for doing that with me.
Well, thank you for having me, Patrick. And like I said, when you and I first got on, if I can reach one person, I know your podcast goes to a lot of people, but if this rings a bell with at least one person each time somebody listens to it, or a group of people listen to it, then hopefully I've made an impression, and people can figure out a way to take action before they're faced with their backs against the wall.
So well put. Thanks, Frank.
Thank you.
I cover a lot of topics on Dementia Empowered: legal concepts, navigating the healthcare system, financial challenges. These concepts are all connected in dementia care. Coming soon to my website, KeystoneElderLaw.com, is a self-guided course to help you put it all together in one place. Anytime and anywhere, I can guide you through a number of sessions to learn the care skills of dementia. If your family would benefit from coaching, send me an email at info@KeystoneElderLaw.com.